All right, folks, we are back with a special edition of the Carry On Friends podcast. And I am talking to Georgie. You can tell, so we are Caribbean and we are Jamaican because Carry On, Georgie-Ann, and all
Yep.
the other Anns, right? But Georgie's no stranger to the podcast. So welcome back, Georgie.
Thank you. I'm super excited to be here to share my opinions and, talk a little bit.
Okay. Georgie, so you're here to talk about Black Cake, the series
Yes.
that's on Hulu. And so I want to kick it off asking you a couple questions. And first, tell me how you heard about the series. Why were you interested in watching the series?
Yeah, so I first heard about the series actually as a book. So I heard about the book. I love reading. I always want to read something new. And I'm literally getting into and wanting to read more Black fiction books. So I read a lot of business, entrepreneurship kind of books. And I was like, I want to read more Black fiction. So Black Cake was definitely on that list. And I was actually looking at the book on Libby, which is the library app, so the New York Public Library app, and there was a wait list. And by the time I got my book, the series also came out. So I was like, you know what? I do love a good book, but I also love a good series, especially a good Black centered, Black history centered series. And I was just like, all right, I can see my stories. They're from the Caribbean. They're Jamaican. I was like, all right, I'm gonna watch this. So that's how I heard about it and what inspired me to watch it.
Wonderful. Thanks for that. So now that you've watched the series, what are your initial thoughts on the series? What did you love about the series?
I love the casting. So I'll definitely say that the casting, it really looked like the transition of a person's age. And unfortunately, we've seen through like Black cinema throughout the years where they don't get the casting right. Like this, there is no way that this was the person as a baby, and then this is them now as a teenager or as an adult. So I've seen castings that have gone really, really bad. So that's the first thing that I love, the casting. The second thing, I really appreciated the accent. So I know a lot of TV shows, when they have a Caribbean or a Jamaican accent, it just sounds butchered, killed, like on the road. And I'm just like, y'all couldn't have hired a real Jamaican to do this. We have actors and actresses too. So I really appreciated the accents. I felt like it was really close, if not exact, really close. Like it was believable for me. It was believable. And just the story overall, it kept me enticed the way they put it together as I every time I watched an episode, I was like, I couldn't wait till the next episode was ready. So I didn't actually watch the full series until the whole thing was done because I'm just like, I'm gonna binge this. We're gonna watch all of this. Because I need to see what's happening next. I watched the first one, I was like, oh, I can't wait. So I stopped and then I just binged the whole thing.
So, you liked the casting, you liked that the accents were livable, right? On a
Mhm.
previous podcast, I talked to Michaela, who you know, that accents are a spectrum, right? They don't have to be like me and you are born in a Jamaica because there's a different accent for those who born in Jamaica versus those who, born and left as a baby versus,
Mhm.
there's just so many spectrums. And then if you live in the South or you live in other parts of the US, that accent just feels differently. And I think, especially if you're like in the UK and other parts, the accent will be different,
Exactly.
right?
Yeah.
So you like those things. What were some things that you're like, I'm not sure. They need to rewind and come again on this, or they could have done better on it.
The one thing that really stood out to me that and it could have been like ignorance because I didn't read the book, so I don't know how it was supposed to go, but I didn't appreciate that they threw Steve in there. So and if sorry for the spoilers who hasn't watched. So the daughter who was queer, her story I felt was watered down by kind of like this white guy that was like toxic behavior, and they could have still told the story while acknowledging these parts of her, because I felt like they were saying like her family history dimmed it down, but then the context of the show then dimmed it down even more. So yeah, maybe it's ignorance because I didn't read the book and that was just a part of her journey. But I felt like they could have leaned in on that instead of kind of giving us this whole other like dude to feel like weird about. I didn't love what happened with Byron and his partner. I think Lynette was her name. I felt like she was, for them to have been, because the idea was they've been together for a really, really long time, And like for him, when she first came back after everything happened with the mom and they listened to the audio, he was just like, get out. And I was like, what do you like? Can you leave? I'm like, what do you mean, can I leave? I've been here for a long, why don't we live together? Like that was a little confusing for me. And just kind of how she came at him, it was well intended. So their relationship didn't seem believable to me. That casting, I'm not gonna lie, it didn't feel like they had the chemistry that I would have liked to see, or I think they could have put together. Um, so that was a little off for me, but otherwise, I feel like it was well written. I wanted more. When I finished, I wanted more. I definitely wanted to hear more of Bunny's story. I definitely wanted to hear more of Mabel's story, and it looks like there's gonna be a part two. So I'm excited for that. But I think they could have told more of Benny's story, and leaned into her queerness, especially since it's such a stigmatized topic in the Caribbean, right? And so, it's like either you're telling it or you're not telling it. And I felt like they weren't sure. And again, it could have just been how the book was written. And then, just kind of throwing this like abusive white guy. I'm like, oh, that's old. Give us something new to deal with. And then lastly, and I'll say this last one, definitely when Byron and Steve got into it, I'm just like, another scene. I'm happy the police just kind of did it seemed like a regular type of arresting for a black guy, right? And that's sad to say, like, oh, they arrested him a regular way they would arrest a person beating up another person. So but I got scared. I was like, oh my god, Byron's gonna die. Oh my god. I started panicking. And so I was pleased. I'm like, oh, the police just tackled him. How lovely. And I felt disappointed to have that feeling, but also grateful because I was like, I couldn't take it if they killed him. I'd have had to turn it off. I'm not gonna lie.
So what if I told you that entire scene with Steve and Byron did not happen in the book?
Now we got a problem. Because
It did
why?
not happen. It
Because
didn't
why the
happen.
trauma? Why the anxiety? Because, like I said, these things
It's
bring up feelings for you,
this
and it's
is
not good
exactly
ones.
what I've been telling my friends. I'm like, can I just watch a black series without having an encounter with the police? Because it creates this anxiety. And it's
Mm-hmm.
like, okay, it's a reality, but if I'm being entertained, let me escape a little bit. Right.
Like
So
we had enough trauma already. Like, was rape not
ex,
enough? Like,
well,
was murder not enough? Was
so
running away from?
so you brought up something which is part of why I wanted to have this conversation, because I'm like, that entire scene with Byron and Steve did not happen at all in the book. I get they want to do these things for dramatic effect, but
Mm-hmm.
Byron's character was this upstanding black man, educated, and he's going to
Mm-hmm.
be reduced to this level. And it's interesting that you use the exact words that you use, because the author, I felt, delicately touched on certain things. He was
Mm-hmm.
a affluent black man driving a nice car and he got pulled over, right? But it
Okay.
wasn't given like too much space. He was just like, this is what happens, and he's
Yeah, it
talking
happened.
about being a black man. So
Mm-hmm.
I'm glad that you said that, because I feel like I need to watch something without feeling like, okay, there's a police trauma in there. I also liked that you brought up Steve and you thought that Steve was given too much airtime.
Yeah.
And what if I told you in the book Steve never gets so much airtime?
Yeah, Steve was doing too much. I could have did without Steve
Yeah,
in like all the scenes. Like when he came back after the restoring, I was like, why this man here?
yeah,
Please
no.
leave
I
Steve.
again, I get the whole dramatic effect, but Steve didn't get so much airtime. It alluded that there was this abusive relationship, blah blah blah. But Steve got enough. You see the same amount of airplay that the girlfriend Joni gets? That's the
Mhm.
same amount of airplay Steve got in the book.
Yeah,
Brief.
and Joni could have gotten more. I feel like again that her character and even just
Actually,
again her personality, like that I feel like I wanted to see more of that because one, she was acknowledging like who Betty was and supporting her through getting to her, living her truth. And she's like, listen, like I love you, I care about you, but like I'm not gonna hide with you. Like you
right.
gotta unpack that trauma. You have to unpack those things. And I feel like we need more voices that are pushing people to be more than the belief that people around them has set for them as well as what they've set for themselves. And so having that voice, even when she came back for like a second, it's like, oh, I'm happy for you. Like, and then Steve got on, I was like, Steve, shut up. Like, can we just like mellow in the fact that Joni's happy for her? Like, can we just
I agree. Steve got too much
Mhm.
airtime. He shouldn't have.
I definitely understand a 50s, 60s Caribbean parent and the concerns that they have. And even the scene when they talk to Benny, like the younger version, I'm not Benny, Byron, the younger version of him, is saying like, you can be vulnerable, but you have to do that at home, unfortunately. So I resonated with that. It's like these are protective measures, and as time change, you have to change with the world, in the sense of like realizing, okay, I can present more stuff. And that's what he was fighting for within his workspace. Like, listen, I can't just be the only um Black person here, or I can't just be your poster child every time. But I wish they could have really leaned in on these stories and give more details, so that way I think there are Caribbean parents that still feel some of these feelings, or whether it's how they want their son or daughter to succeed, about being queer, like they have these feelings. And so having hearing the conversation, even not even having it themselves, hearing the conversation and maybe some of the nuances that they could resonate with, I think helps the next generation that's coming up, and even helps the parents process and see and understand why they feel what they feel. Like, do they really feel this, or is it just because culturally accepted or culturally unaccepted? And then really get to the core of their feelings, because most times they're not going to go to nobody's therapy, they're not going to go do the hard work, and it's scary. And so you have to acknowledge, like, this is literally a complete 180 from what you told was right or wrong. Or even the scene at the end around Duppy, it's just like there's a lot of controversy around that too. And so it's just like,
What
who,
controversy?
not on social media, but I feel like there's people that more modern people is like, oh, that's not a thing, like you're just being dramatic around like spiritual things. So I know people that are just like, what do you mean Duppy and ghosts? All of that is like foolishness. Stop it. Like, you don't need nobody 99. Like, they don't believe in none of that. I'm just like, well, I'm gonna just hold on to it just in case.
Yeah. So, I feel like um we are looking at the series through the lens of being Jamaican and Caribbean, and everyone else is just looking at it very differently. So we are picking apart like that really wouldn't happen in a like would that? And
Yeah.
I get the idea of making it a mass appeal. And I felt like this was an opportunity. And I mean, yes, it is pressure, but because I know that the book centered Caribbean characters, a Caribbean American, a Caribbean diasporic lifestyle. I I was expecting to see myself or
Mm,
people who come on the show, people who I interact with. I expected to see some hint of that in
yeah.
there, and my experience was just like there were elements of like maybe the black cake and stuff, but I didn't feel like the characters really I can't explain. It's like, yeah,
Like
we know that
tugged on
they're
the Caribbean
Jamaican.
enough.
Yes,
Like, yeah.
they weren't,
Yeah. It was
it's
just like a sprinkle versus like, this is the
the
food.
full exactly,
Yeah.
right? The entire story is built on the cultural heritage of
Yep.
the characters, the main characters being Covey, right? The black cake, and I felt like that was an undercurrent as opposed to like this major part.
Yeah.
A nod to CCH Pounder coming at the end and talking about the 9 nights. I think she brought in like the most
Like Caribbean
Caribbean
essence. Yeah.
vibe to
Yeah.
the thing. And I'm
Mhm.
not saying everybody should have been walking around with an accent, but I just felt like my favorite episodes are episodes 1 and 2 because of course it's centered around the culture. Once the characters go foreign, they literally became just foreigners. They were American or British. It's almost as if their Caribbean culture was secondary,
Yeah.
whereas it was essentially who they were in the thing. And I just didn't feel like the series captured that much. But like I said to Michaela, like I will still support it and give it space because these are an opportunity to support the work but critique the work so people
Yeah.
after them know how to do better in
Mhm.
terms of really making authentic Caribbean American characters because we are a large demographic and we're underserved. So when we feel a sense of disappointment when we feel like this it could have been more.
Mhm.
So that's just part of my feelings. So you seem excited about a season 2.
Yes.
What exactly are you looking forward to potentially in a season 2?
I definitely want to see Benny or Byron or all of them. I need them to go back to Jamaica. Like I need them to go to Jamaica, whether it's Benny creating some type of art, Byron studying the oceans down there, laying out the map of the lands, or Mabel exploring her Caribbean or even Asian, being part Chinese, exploring that background because it in the end the spin that it seemed like it was gonna give, and I'm not gonna be too happy if this is what it gives, is gonna be focused on Mabel and she's going to Scotland. So I'm just like, did the white man steal this whole story from us just now? Like that's how I was just like, I don't want to lean into that. But that's what the sprinkle gave me. And then it was her story around Geo. So it looks like we're gonna Scotland, we're gonna go to Rome potentially. The background of her adopted parents that she thought was her biological parents. Where did they, maybe some of her upbringing being biracial and not knowing it, passing. So I think it's gonna go in that direction, which I would be really disappointed if that's like the again, if that's the food and Benny maybe be a sprinkle. I'm gonna be really disappointed because while it is important to acknowledge cultures coming together, that melting pot, because that's what Mabel represents, the melting pot, the diversity, biracial, like there's a lot of material centered around biracial and culture blending, which I think there is space for, absolutely. But I feel like there hasn't been enough done to recognize the diaspora of the Black community before we go there yet. You know what I mean? Because a lot of the content I've seen when it comes to like biracial content does center around the white side. It's like, oh, it's like the Black side is all the stereotypes, and then here's like the white side. It's like, trying to fit in. They don't fit in with the white side, and it's like, how do we get them to fit in, and the challenges and da 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 da. Like, okay, I hear you, but I need we need more stories exploring the Black diaspora before we shift this, especially this specific series. We can't just let's go over there now. I think there's definitely way more to explore with Benny and Byron and their experiences, and even within like Byron kind of gonna talk about the racial discrimination. I have room for that, but I want to see him like open up his own center because again, for me, him spending too much time around the racial discrimination suit is just again a defensive position, like, oh, I got my guard up and like I'm fighting still, versus like I'm existing and we're trying, we're thriving, right? Like it's not so much. I want a little less survival and a little less more like living. There is part survival in living, but just more living, like existing, if that makes sense.
That makes total sense. I would recommend that you go listen to the audiobook because all the things that you say that you want to see in the book or in the season 2 kind of happen in the book, you know.
Okay, so you've
It
sold me. Let me go claim it on Libby.
yes, go claim it on Libby, I listened to the audiobook, which I believe is a phenomenal performance of the audiobook. I think you'll have a different experience of the book. I Even if you read the book, I think now that you've gotten like a visual, there will be some discrepancies, but I encourage you to still read the book. I'm
Yeah,
curious to see what they're going to pull out to do a season 2 because they've veered so far from the book that I'm curious about how are you going to
reel
create
it
a
back
new
in.
storyline because you've
Mhm.
gone so far in one direction, how you going to bring it back into bring it back or make it engaging. So I'm not sold on a season 2 that I'll commit to it. I'm not. um
Yes, I
but
feel you.
we'll see. I might be persuaded. Like I said, I'm not saying I'm never going to watch it. I'm just not sold on it for almost all the reasons that you say. But I'm glad that we're having the conversation and making space because we are the Caribbean American audience, and yeah, yeah, it's about us, and we want to see ourselves. And when we don't see it represented the right way, we're gonna make them know.
We're gonna
Say
say
it's
something. Yes,
we're
exactly.
gonna,
Because we gonna one thing we're gonna do is talk.
we're going to talk. So thank you so much for coming on and giving your perspective on Black Cake, the series on Hulu. I recommend you go read the book,
Absolutely,
or listen to the book. I'm an audio first girl,
I feel
and
you.
it was just an amazing performance. So, Georgie, thank you again for being a friend of the podcast. And as I love to say at the end of anything that me I do, walk good.
Yeah, absolutely. Happy to be here, and I can't wait to hear the rest of everybody's feedback. And I'm definitely gonna get the audiobook or the physical book and read it over the holidays.
Awesome.